Welcome to what promises to be a remarkable evening of conversation. Spiritual, logical, and I can promise you, fun. Because it's easy to promise you all that when the guest is Sadhguru Jagi Vasudev ji. Sadhguru, thank you very much for giving us the time. And it's obviously my charm that has brought all these people to fill up the hall on a Saturday evening. I just had to say, I'll have Sadhguru by my side. That's all that was needed. So thank you very much. Sadhguru, my vantage point in life is news. Hard news, bad news mostly. So it's very difficult for me to relate to anything which is not hard news. You are a guru who helps people resolve their dilemmas. You use the example of Siri on GPS, that if you can trust a strange woman with telling you turn left, turn right, why don't you need a guru in real life? Now, play the guru in Kashmir for this young officer who has a dilemma. He is facing a stone-throwing mob. He has a very small number of troops with him. Either he risks getting written off, or he risks firing at the mob, or he has an innovative idea. You know what I'm talking about. If he, at that point, found you, what would you tell him?
Namaskaram to everyone. See, the decisions made on a battlefield or by a fighting force should be left to the last man there, because he is the one who is facing the bullets. He is the one who is sticking his neck out. He is the one who is standing there knowing fully well his wife could be widowed, his children could be orphaned, and still doing his job. None of us have any business to give him any advice. Not even me.
Not even you?
I would not advise. I would say just do what's needed, because you're sticking your life out, you're risking everything. Who am I to tell you what you should do there?
What would Lord Krishna do if this was a situation that Arjun faced in Mahabharata?
Lord Krishna faced with a situation where someone who is a warrior for his entire life, suddenly his heart sank into his boots. And his problem is not killing. He's thrived on that, he's known for that, and he has no issue killing these people. He's just got 5–10 people in that crowd that he's not able to kill. Those who he thinks are dear to him, his grandfather, his guru, whoever else. Rest of the people he's always willing to kill. So, Krishna's business is he's saying, anyway you're willing to kill, what about these special people? Especially those who are dear to you, if you kill them, you may get realized. If you kill those whom you hate, you will not realize anything, you will become more of a fool. But you're killing someone who is very dear to you, now you're going to realize something very precious in your life.
So Lord Krishna would tell this officer, you take the call, I'll back you, I'll back your judgment.
I mean, he decided to be his charioteer, not he's not fighting with him. Obviously he said, I'm backing you.
Right. So suppose the man who was put on the bonnet of the jeep, he were to come to you and he were to tell you that, Sadhguru, I am deeply wounded by this, I feel humiliated, I wasn't throwing stones, I had gone to vote, I'm not traumatized. How do I recover from this?
See, you need to understand this. In a way, it may not be a full-scale battlefield, but it is a battlefield. It is a battlefield.
Right.
Those who have stones are throwing stones, those who have pellets are firing pellets, those who have bullets are firing bullets. Whatever you have you're using, it is a battlefield. So on a battlefield, it is not always selective treatment. It happens, you're there, so it happens to you. You may be an innocent woman, you may be a totally innocent child, it doesn't matter who you are. You're in that place, things happen to you. Everybody must know this. So this is why maintaining peace in our minds, in our societies, in the world around us is of paramount importance, because once a battle happens, it's not selective, it'll happen to everybody. This is something we must know. This is why we must value what we have, some sense of peace happening right now in the world. Wherever it is peaceful, we must see that we must preserve and endure this, because when battles happen, it is not going to… bullets are not going to choose that man who is guilty or that man who is evil. It just hits anybody. So we must understand this, and he must understand this too.
Is there more violence now in our society than before? Do people jump to beat somebody, kill somebody too easily?
No. I would say violence is at the minimum compared to the way human societies have been in the past. 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, how much violence was happening in human societies, how much is happening today is way less. Only problem with us today is the instruments of violence. What empowerment that's come to our hands, that today you need a million-strong army to kill 1 million people, but today it just takes a press of a button to do that. That is a tremendous…
And we know who has the button these days.
It seems they're taking away the button. They're only given the Twitter handle to them.
I think he does enough damage with the Twitter handle, but I think it's a good thing to know that even he has nice sound sleep, because he falls asleep in the middle of writing a tweet.
I didn't know about that. I thought he does it when he wakes up.
So, talk about India. Do we have more violence in India now on the street than we had before?
Not true. I think people may be feeling that way because violence enters their home through the television screen. Otherwise, violence happened and we did not know. We just read 2 people killed in the newspaper.
Sadhguru, that's only between 8 and 11 p.m. at night. Violence enters our homes on the TV screen.
Because the blood and gore is entering our homes, the impact of violence on us is big. I would say it is positive in one sense that all of us get a certain sense of allergy to violence, which I think is happening because we see it. Otherwise, we read 2 people killed, this much in a newspaper. It was just 2 people killed, that's all it was. But now it all happens, even if you're blurring a few images, but there is blood on the street. This is sinking into us deeper and we understand the value of being peaceful. It's real now, it's not just a number.
But then you see pictures of this man pleading to be spared his life in Jharkhand, but is then killed. You see many such visuals coming up. It looks like we are becoming more cruel than we used to be. Is it because we are becoming less spiritual, or we are more impatient?
No, I think there is less space in the country.
There is less?
Less space in the country.
In the hall for sure.
Not only in the hall, in the country. Because at one time I crisscrossed India on my motorcycle, and when I rode the highways and bylanes and all kinds of streets around the country, if I rode 100 kilometers, I would see maybe 25, 50 people. Today, there's a stream of people going everywhere. We kind of multiplied irresponsibly. So there is no space. When there is no space, there is more friction, you know. So this is something we have to look at, unless you somehow know how to reproduce another country.
That
geographically…
only a wise man like you might have an answer. None of us does.
So, if you're going to reproduce by drinking each other's tears, there would be a lot of reproduction because so many tears are happening.
So, when you heard this wise judge talking, what was your reaction? That Peacock is our national bird because it remains lifelong brahmachari, and the peahen pecks at its tears. And in fact, he said produces Moria morni. He didn't realize that morni lays eggs. It's not a mammal. So, I mean, there is a judge who's been sitting on people's fortunes, maybe hanging them.
That was my first thought. In the last 25, 30 years of service, how many people must have shed tears?
But Sadhguru, from where does this ignorance come? Normal educated people, doesn't even have to be a judge. Class 8 biology we all read.
See, normal educated people may be knowledgeable about the reproductive nature of the peacock. But obviously, there are too many things that they're also ignorant about. The judge is ignorant about the bird's ways of life, which is okay. Because he's not passing a judgment on the peacocks at least. They don't come to the court. But in my experience and perception of life, I'm not so fearful about the evil on the planet, because it can be managed. The real danger is ignorance. That is the biggest problem. And ignorance can take a toll that no evil can take.
And if I may interrupt, it's because there is ignorance that fanaticism takes over.
See, the thing is, I think a lot of people are ignorant about the nature of fanaticism. Why someone becomes a fanatic is because in some way… See, all of us do some stupid things, all right? Hello? You don't have to say it so loudly. If you do something idiotic right now, the very nature of human intelligence is such that tonight your intelligence will bother you. Why did I do this? But if you get your stupidity scripture endorsed or God endorsed, then there's no turning back.
This is how it was written.
It can be done with enormous confidence.
Right.
You don't have to turn back and look. You can do most idiotic things with horrendous consequences to everybody, but you have endorsement from elsewhere.
Ye likha tha.
So, this, I think, is in a place where in the next 25 years, maximum 40 years, I see that the scriptures, the heavens will collapse. It is already collapsing in many ways. In individual minds, still people don't have the courage to voice it, or it's not articulated in their mind yet, but it is collapsing. The very fact that I think in the last 25 or 30 years, the alcohol consumption in the country has gone up 1,000 times. This means heavens are collapsing. So before everybody becomes a drunkard or a drug addict, it's important that raising of the consciousness happens, that we are able to teach you how to sit here totally blissed out and stoned out by yourself without any substance. Because otherwise, in the next 50 years, you will see 90% of the human population will be on some kind of a chemical. Already it's getting there very rapidly, either prescribed or otherwise. United States, for example, I'm taking United States as an example because it is considered to be the most affluent nation. Either as an individual or a society or a nation, you seek affluence for two fundamental reasons. In the early stages, it's a choice of nourishment. That's what you're seeking. You can eat what you want. The next stage is a choice of lifestyles. This is the only reason why you're seeking affluence. Now a nation becomes far more affluent than the rest of the world, you have a choice of nourishment. and you have an enormous choice of lifestyle, and 70% of the population is on prescription medication. There's a $3 trillion bill on the healthcare. Lot of people are predicting, if at all, if anything sinks United States, it is going to be their healthcare bill. So with such a choice of nourishment and lifestyle, why the hell are you not healthy? 70% are on prescription medication, another 30% are buying off the back street anyway. So, prescribed medicines and drugs, everything, chemicals to do everything. To create an experience within you, either of health or peace or joy or bliss, you need a chemical. This is on the rise simply because in people's minds, they may not be conscious, heaven is collapsing. For a long time, we have managed people, it doesn't matter you're miserable here, when you go there,
You'll be fine.
everything will be fantastic, okay? That everything will be fantastic somewhere else is slowly collapsing in everybody's mind. So here they're trying to make it fantastic because nobody taught them how. They're trying to drink themselves to a fantastic state or drug themselves to a fantastic state. So fundamentally, what they're looking for is heaven. They may be hitting the bottle, they may look like a drug addict, there may be rejects in the society, but the man who goes to the temple and the man who goes to the bar are seeking the same thing. They want their life to become fantastic. Yes or no?
But fanaticism comes from Puritanism as well. See, many religions which are now producing very strong fanatical streams are also very puritanical.
No. You need to understand this. They offer you the wildest kind of pleasures elsewhere, okay? They're not puritanical in any sense.
So you just have to be patient. Or in fact, you don't have to be patient, you get yourself killed quickly and get there.
No, I will tell you. Can I tell you a little joke?
Sure, sir. More than a little joke.
This happened in Alabama. A Sunday school teacher was on full fire, full on.
In Alabama.
Alabama, of course.
Yes, right.
And the audience were not like this, they were all tiny tots because the policies kept them young.
This is the Bible Belt of America.
Yeah. And full on he was going, in his rhetoric he stopped and asked, what do you have to do to go to heaven? Little Mary, sitting in the front row, of course, she said, if I scrub the church floor every Sunday morning, I will go to heaven. Absolutely. Another little girl, she said, if I share 50% of my pocket money with my less privileged friend, I will go to heaven. Correct. Another little boy, if I help people who are in need, I will go to heaven. Correct. Little Tommy in the back bench stood up and said, you gotta die first. Well, that's a qualification. When you die, depending on your culture, they will either burn you, bury you or cut you and throw you to the birds, all right? This is one eco-friendly thing you will do. You will put your body back into the earth, it's a good thing to do. Okay, now some people are trying to put it into the space, which is a crime. So, you leave your body here and go, that much you know. So you went to heaven without the body. In the Hindu heaven, food is very good. Somewhere else, those white-gowned ladies are floating in the clouds. Another place you encounter virgin problems. So I'm asking, once you don't have a body, what are you going to do with good food and virgins? So I'm saying, human intellect has reached a point today that for the first time in the history of humanity, more human beings are able to think for themselves than ever before. Otherwise, your pandit, your priest, your scripture, somebody thought for you. Now people are beginning to think for themselves. Whether thinking right or wrong, that's not a question, but they're thinking. Once you think for yourself, it doesn't matter how absurd your thought looks to me, but in your mind you're logically correct. This is the only way you can think, yes? Yes. So once you're thinking logically step by step, anything that's illogical won't fit into your mind frame. So, heavens will collapse. If you ask 3 questions, 90% of the scriptures on the planet will collapse. This is what I'm trying to breed, not answers, questions.
So-
Deepen the questions in such a way, everything that you think is an authority collapses and only truth will become the authority in your life.
So this is getting fascinating. So I am actually stealing your time, I promise you time. Since you said ask 3 questions, any scripture will collapse. One question that will make the Hindu scripture collapse, one question that will make the Christian scriptures collapse, and one question that will make the Muslim scriptures collapse.
You're trying to have me killed.
I am your accomplice. I'll die first and go to heaven. And try to take my body with me.
One fortune that we have in this country, in this culture is, you don't have one overarching scripture. That's the best thing about this culture, that you don't have to follow any book. This has always been a land of seekers, not a land of believers. Seeker means you have realized that you do not know, that's why you're seeking. In a seeker's mind, there are no conclusions. So this is why this culture has been so flexible. But now, we are also trying to compete with others and say, we also have a book, otherwise we're getting left out.
Right.
But we have too many books, you don't know which one to read, and you can never read all of them because there are too many.
Right.
So, it's a good thing that there is no authority,
Right.
there is seeking. So, this fundamentally means this, that you're in pursuit of truth. You must understand this, in this culture, this is a godless culture. Because here we always told you the highest value of your life is mukti, liberation, freedom is the highest value. God is just one more stepping stone if you want to use. If you don't want to use, there are other ways to do it. But the important thing is you become liberated. Liberated means that you move away from cycles, either psychological, emotional, physiological or life cycles. You transcend the cycles of life so that you become free. Cyclical means you're going in rounds. If you're going round and round, it means you're not getting anywhere. So the fundamental goal of life here, see today it's gone, just in the previous generation in daily conversation, mukti, moksha, karma, prarabdha, these were like normal words, these are not spiritual words. Yes or no? Daily conversation. It's not in a spiritual discourse that people use these words. In everyday conversation, my grandmother and my mother, when they spoke, they would always say, "Ayo, it's this prarabdha, it is this karma, what about my mukti?" Every day. It was part of our lives. Today we've become a little shy of that because we've become a little educated and constipated in our heads.
And we have statins that keep our arteries clean.
I'm sorry.
We have statins that keep our arteries clean. So we think we can live forever. Question there? Do you have a microphone? Jasmine? It's just coming to you.
Those who want to live forever, I would say, please have some compassion for everybody else around you. At some time you have to pass.
My humble pranams, Satyaji. My name is Ram Bhushan. I'm an investment banker. Just thinking about what you were saying, does spirituality and religion mean the same, or are they different?
See, essentially, when you say, "I'm religious," you refer to yourself as a believer. Let's understand what is belief. Belief means you have made a conclusion about something that you do not know. I'll ask you a simple question. Many things you believe, I don't want to go into that. But how many of you here believe that you have 2 hands? Raise one hand, please. Do you believe you have 2 hands or do you know that you have 2 hands? Can somebody start an argument with you and prove to you you have no 2 hands? If their argument becomes too overwhelming, one slap in the face, he knows you got hands.
In fact, One on either side. Then he knows you have two.
No, one slap will make the point. So, belief essentially means you have conclusions about things that you do not know, or you are not yet straight enough. You do not have the fundamental sense of integrity within you that you can admit what I do not know as I do not know. Why? Why is it so difficult? What is the problem with I do not know? I do not know is a tremendous possibility. Only if you say I do not know, the longing to know, the seeking to know, and the possibility of knowing becomes a reality in your life. Everything you do not know, you believe. You will never ever explore. And from what basis do you believe? You must see this always. If you want to believe something, you always want 100 people around you. But when you want to seek, you want to be alone. This means if you want to bull yourself, you need a herd around you. But when you want to seek, you want to be alone. So, you want to be a part of the herd, and in the herd, it looks like it's a power that all of us believe the same thing. It's a tremendous power, it has done many things. Belief means it gives you confidence without clarity. It's a disaster. If you don't have clarity, it is best that you're hesitant, isn't it? If my vision is not clear, now the hall is packed, and I want to walk through, my vision is not clear, but I have confidence. This is a disaster, I'm going to step on every one of you. But if my vision is not clear, if I have some sense, I know my vision is not clear, I would seek your help and go through you without touching anybody. Either you must have clarity, or you must have at least hesitation about what you're doing. Intelligence always hesitates. Belief doesn't hesitate because it gives you confidence without clarity. So essentially, spiritual process means you have come to terms with your ignorance. You understand that you do not know. But the very nature of human intelligence, this is not that somebody has to inspire you to become spiritual. The very nature of human intelligence is such, if you realize you really do not know something, it is very natural, whether you like it or you don't like it, it starts seeking. So spiritual process is a natural consequence of you being absolutely straight with yourself. I mean, I'm using a wrong word probably today. Sincere with yourself.
We shall not ask the honorable retired judge of the Rajasthan High Court to interpret this sentence. Or you might end up in a troublesome place.
I'm still thinking about the victims.
Niranjan Hiranandani.
Sadhguruji, Pranam, great respects for you. Question from the point which you put across, that America became a rich country, prosperous, needed to have good food, nourishment, then went into chemicals. What next? And on a personal event, just to keep that on one side and ask you a relevant question, I've achieved in my life a lot of success in terms of my business, prosperity, charities, giving, whatnot. What next?
You built half of Bombay, you want to build the remaining half.
United States has moved from very hard work, 2-3 generations worked very hard to build that nation and made it into a great nation, and which brought enormous amount of prosperity. Whether we like it or we don't like it, if we check the trousers of half the people in this hall, they're all wearing blue denims. It's an American workman's clothes. This is not American elite clothes, this is American workman's clothes. American workman's clothes became phenomenal across the world because it spelled success. You must understand this. The only thing that people in the world will imitate is success. America spells success. Whatever America does, people want to do. If everybody wears blue pants, half the world is wearing blue pants. If they tear their pants, half the world is tearing up their pants. If they put carbon dioxide in a bottle and say this is the real thing, half the world is drinking it. So it doesn't matter what they do, everybody is doing it because America means success in most people's mind. So they're only trying to imitate success, they're not trying to imitate America. So what we need in this country is also that. America moved into chemicals because they made one mistake. They started making this one word, freedom, too much.
Freedom.
Freedom. The moment you talk about personal freedom, then you will tend to do irresponsible, freaky things. Instead of talking about freedom, you should have talked about the means to freedom. The means to freedom is responsibility. If you act in a responsible way, there will be freedom for all of us. Right now I'm driving on the street, I've been coming here thinking somebody told me it will take 15 minutes, max 20 minutes. Well, I've been on the street for 45 minutes because so many free drivers are there. Okay? If there were responsible drivers, we would come here in 15 minutes or 20 minutes. It is not because there are too many vehicles, it is because there are a lot of free drivers, okay, who are coming in the opposite direction because it's a free country, they can go where they want. Some people are living on the street, some people are having discussions on the street, all kinds of things happening because it's freedom. We should never use the word freedom because it is a consequence. It's just like you want to grow flowers in your garden, you don't talk flowers. You talk soil, you talk manure, you talk water, you talk sunlight. Flower is a consequence. If you talk flowers, you will end up with plastic flowers in your house. You will not have real flowers. This is what happened to America. They started talking too much about freedom. Now in the name of freedom, half the people became freaks, which is costing heavily. 2-3 generations worked so hard to build that nation. Now if you… in a city, if you take 20 people off the street like that, there are only, in my estimate, only 5 to 7 people who have some qualification, who can create something for that nation. Rest are all freedom going on. Too much freedom going on, and you will lose it. You will completely lose it because you're talking freedom. If you create the ecosystem, freedom will happen as a consequence. You're trying to create flowers without roots. That's not going to work. India should not make that mistake. In fact, our urban societies are talking in the same language. In India, what to do? I have achieved material success. See, you must understand this. If I have to put it into very fundamental interpretation of this, your success in your commercial activity or your professional activity essentially means largely one large segment of that, there may be other element to it. Large segment of it is you have handled your survival process, okay? Our survival process is getting exaggerated all the time. What is survival is getting all the time exaggerated and the bar is raising, for which we're going to pay a huge price, okay? We must fix this is survival. Beyond that is about creating what matters to you. What matters to you genuinely as a life, not as a man, not as a woman, not as this caste or that caste or this community or that. As a human being, what matters to you matters to every human being, fortunately. Yes or no? If you create that in your life, once survival is taken care of, this is what you must do. But above all these things are still social activity. But there is a fundamental thing about you being a piece of life. But right now, most people are not life. They're just a bundle of thoughts, emotions, ideas, opinions and prejudices. Their thinking, their psychological drama is life. I must tell you this, all of you should take time to do this. Every day in Mumbai, in Coimbatore, on an average, every day about 20 to 23 people die. Natural death and 2-3 accidents and something. In a place like Mumbai, there may be 150, 200 people or 250 people dying. I'm just estimating, guessing rather. You must see how people die. It's very important. Because most people believe other people die. No, you and me going to die, all right? Not today, we don't wish today, we wanted to postpone it. We want It will be postponed as much as possible, but we will die. It's very important you see how people die. You will see, unfortunately, 80% of the people on the planet, when the moment of death comes, they're bewildered. They're not in pain. They're not even in fear. They're just bewildered. Because you'll see that sense of… that expression of bewilderment on their face. Because it is like you went to the cinema theater and in the first scene you fell asleep. Then, when the end happened, when the lights came on, you came up, you look bewildered because it's already over. You never saw it, but it's over. This is the experience because you are mistaking your thought and emotion for life. This is just your psychological drama, you can play it any way you want. There is no profound experience of life. This is what needs to happen because essentially you're here to experience this life, isn't it? Yes or no? Yes. Your thought is not experience of life, your emotion is not experience of life, it's a drama that you're creating and you think it's happening to you. No, you are making it up. Life is happening within you, it's a tremendous phenomena. The greatest phenomena that's happening here in this cosmos is life process, isn't it? And you are life. If you don't experience this and you built half of Mumbai, it's useful for other people, not useful for you.
Question in the back, and then we come to Krista.
Hello.
Oh, let…
Yeah. So I have a question on belief, like energy. My dad keeps on saying like if you go to a very spiritual temple or something, you'll feel some sort of energy. So how do you feel that energy? Because every time I go, he's like, did you feel the energy? And I'm like, no.
Tell us your name and what you do.
I'm a student. My name is Nirvan Rohira.
I'm sure the place of worship is electrified, right?
No, suppose I go to Siddhivinayak, he feels some sort of energy when you go to the idol over there and you touch it, he feels some sort of energy and he's like, did you feel the energy? I'm like, no, it's like, all I feel after 20 people pushing me out.
We need young people to ask the best questions.
Welcome. See now, it's like this. Monsoon is coming. I know Mumbai doesn't handle monsoons very well, but it's a phenomenon. In India, in the subcontinent, especially in the southern Deccan Plateau, monsoon is a huge phenomenon. I must tell you this. I was living on a farm in a very remote place. I went to this remote place because there was a lake in the front and a hill at the back. I was doing hang gliding, so I want to be in this remote place. So I have… there's one man whose name was Chikke Gowda. He is hard of hearing, he can't hear, so he is the object of fun in the village. He is ridiculed for everybody. So I took him on. I said, you be with me. And he stayed in my farm. He can't hear 90% of what you speak, you have to yell at him, otherwise he cannot really hear. So he just sits there like that, simply, you know how in the village they sit, they squat like that, and simply sits there. Society is cut off because you have no hearing. So there's certain attention to other things probably. So one day morning, early morning, he starts preparing the plough. I say, what are you going to plough? There's no rain. He said, no, it's going to rain today. I look at the sky, it's a clear sky. I said, how is it going to rain? He says, no, Swami, it's going to rain. I think he's a fool, but that afternoon it pours. Repeatedly it happened. Then I went and sat just like him, I squatted. I held out my hand trying to feel the moisture, the temperature, this, that, all my stupid education. It took me over 18 months to figure this out. I paid enormous attention to this. I wanted to know, how is this fool who doesn't know a thing, he knows when it's going to rain and I don't know. I didn't like it. So I spent over 18 months paying attention to many aspects. Today, if I say it'll rain, 95% of the time it will rain. This is not some magic. This is a certain level of keenness of observation and sensitivity to many things that are happening. What you need to understand is, If it's going to rain, the ants know it's going to rain, the birds know it's going to rain, the trees know it's going to rain. You are the only one missing. Who is the fool? So, I don't want you to just believe what your father says. At least, probably you can believe that he wouldn't simply blatantly lie to you. You must check it out if he is so, okay? You must check it out. I'm saying, you must make some effort to raise your level of sensitivity before you dismiss it. Whether he is lying or he is experiencing something that you do not know, don't just dismiss it, you must seek.
Sableen has the microphone.
How are you?
Sadhguruji, Pranam. I'm going to ask you an uncomfortable question, and I want you to answer it so that it'll be useful for Shekhar's
No, is the
headline.
question uncomfortable for you?
No, I want you to answer it as truthfully as possible. The Sanatan Dharma seems to be in a lot of trouble these days. We have people in the name of books and in the name of Hinduism killing other people because of cows. And, you know, we see this now across the country. So when you say there's less violence today, on what basis are you saying this? And are you worried that the whole concept of the Sanatan Dharma is now in, in danger?
Am I worried? No, I am not. I am not worried because, first of all, let's understand this. Dharma does not mean a religion as it's being interpreted today. Dharma means the law. So we have different kinds of laws. We said, in a family, a husband has one kind of dharma, wife has another kind of dharma. In the society, this kind of dharma, Raj dharma, all kinds of dharma. Different laws which govern different activities in our life. In this one particular law we mentioned is Sanatan Dharma. That means it's an eternal law. That means obviously not concerned with the society, because social laws are evolving, changing as per situations. Eternal law means it concerns something very fundamental within us, which doesn't change. So we don't have to be ever concerned, will the eternal laws will get lost somewhere? They will not get lost. As long as human beings are there, it's always there. Nobody need to worry that Sanatan Dharma will go away. Well, it may go away the way you believe it is, and that's a good thing. About lot of people getting killed because of cows, I'm sorry, but you put few riders that I must answer truthfully. You must also get ready to digest truth. Because it's hard to digest truth many times. I don't know what is your engagement with people. I have a huge engagement with large masses of people on a daily basis. I don't see any such violence anywhere. You see this violence only in the television screens, largely. I'm not saying it's not at all happening. Obviously it's happening, that's why it's being reported, all right. But saying that it's taking isolated incidents and saying it's widespread is a very wrong idea. You must understand more than Sanatan Dharma or any cow protection or whatever. There are economic interests. This is a country for everything we are fighting, because for everything there is a competition, for everything there is a scarcity. There are economic interests, and when they find some holy reason to exploit something for economic interest, they will go all out to do it. And many times it's been found out, people who did these things are found a convenient way of stealing somebody's cows, found a convenient way of taking away somebody's consignment of animals for their own use. All these aspects are there. Yes, there are some hotheads who will rise. When hot air balloons rise, you have to just lower the heat and bring them down. This is the business of the government, and I think they will do it, law and order. It is just a law and order situation.
So you certainly disapprove of this, Gau Rakshaks taking the law into their hands and thrashing people.
Whether you're a Gau slaughterer or a Gau Rakshak, you can't take the law into your hand, you understand? Whoever the hell you are, You cannot take the law into your hand. But having said that, there is one problem. See, we make laws for which we don't have the courage to enforce. Either we must withdraw those laws or we must enforce the law. You make a law and you don't enforce because of political reasons and other sensitivities, somebody else takes it up upon himself to enforce the law in his own crude way. So, this is something as a society we must look at it, not just the government. As a society, all of us as citizens of this nation, we should look at it. There are laws in this country. If we enforce them fully, what will happen to many aspects of our life? Do we want this law or we don't want this law is something that we must take a call on. Without taking this call, there is a law and you don't want it enforced, that's not right, isn't it? So somebody else enforces, he thinks he's being righteous by doing this. He has a enormous sense of pride that he's enforcing a law of the land. The law of the land should be enforced by law enforcement agencies. Why are we not doing it? For political reasons or social reasons? No, we must decide whether we want a specific law or we don't want a law.
Ashwini. There comes a sociologist.
Yeah, Sadhguruji, Namaskaram. I'm professor at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Ashwini Kumar. My first query, I'm sharing a query with you, and then a question, in the larger context. Have you experienced God?
Which God are you talking about?
I don't know, I'm asking you. I don't know God. I come from the land of Tukaram, Kabir and Nanak, so I don't know who is the God. I'm asking you, have you experienced the God?
Let me tell you this much. A lot of people think this is a title, but this is a description. When you call someone a Sadguru, what it means is that you don't go to him because you want to understand your scripture, because he is not read any. You don't go to him because you want to go to heaven, because he's not been there and he's not interested in going there. Okay. Sadguru literally means one who comes from within. I know this piece of life from its origin to its ultimate, and that's all I know. If it's sounding like a confession, I'm sorry. This is all I know. I know this piece of life in its entirety. This, not even that.
So Sadhguru…
Because I know this, and the nature of creation is such, today there is a scientific theory coming up which is called as constructional theory. What they're trying to prove is how the atom is made, that is how the cosmos is made. How a single cell is made, that is how every life is made. How an amoeba is made, that's how you are made. Just the complexity and sophistication is multiplying, that's all. This is something we have said it forever in the yogic sciences. Anda Pindanda are same. The minutest minuscule of creation and the ultimate creation are same in fundamental design. Only complexity and sophistication is multiplying. So, if you know this, people think you know everything. That is their problem. I don't know everything. I don't know any heaven or hell. I know this. I know this piece of life entirely. Fortunately, because you're also piece of life and you're also just made like me, if I talk about myself, you think I'm talking about you. If I talk about myself, you think I'm talking about the cosmos. If I talk about myself, people think I'm talking about God. Because these are all their interpretations. I'm only talking about myself because that's the only thing I know.
Sadhguruji, my next and my final thought I'm sharing with you. These days we are in dilemma about two Mahants and two yogis. I'm coming from Banaras and I met one Mahant who is Sankat Mochan's Mahant, Mahant Vishwambar Nathji. And there is another Mahant who is ruling a state of UP. One spews, hatred and all kinds of communal disharmony. The other Mahant speaks the language of Sankat Mochan. far more liberal, far more peaceful language. Which Mahant Sadhguruji should be adopted?
I didn't know they were available for adoption.
In fact, one of them went around the state asking for votes, which is adoption, and he got adopted.
Once someone has become, in a democratic society, has become an elected leader, then what he believes, what he thinks within himself, all these things are irrelevant to you. What he's going to do every day, you must pay attention. If he's doing something wrong, we have instruments to stop him. If he's doing it right, we must support him. That's about it. You don't have to adopt any political leader. If they're doing the right thing for the nation, we must support them. If they're doing wrong thing for the nation, we must criticize that. If we can stop it, there are instruments in a democracy through which we can stop it in so many different ways. If not immediately, we can. So this is what we should do as responsible citizens, not have my pet politician. No, you should not have a pet politician of your own. The politician that you have elected, is he working for the nation or is he working for himself, is all that you have to see, first step. The second step is, does he have the breadth of the mind and intelligence and competence to create what the nation needs? Does he understand the heartbeat of this nation? That is the second thing. If these two things are happening within a politician or a leader, it's our business to support him. If that is not there, it's our business to change him.
Sadhguruji, pranam. My name is Diska. I'm an actor and a writer. I have a series of perplexities. I want to know about the purpose of life. I want to understand and seek writing characters, playing characters. One tries to understand that is the universe random and chaos, or is there a design? I also want to understand that are we players or are we being played and being watched? These are my questions.
Please. See, the fundamental question in all this is, I'm trying to make the question more simple, is do I have a say in the way I live my life, or is it all controlled from elsewhere? Am I being kicked around, or can I also kick the ball? That's the thing. This is one culture, and the only culture on the planet which has always told you, your life is your karma. This means your life is your making. Unfortunately, this is the most dynamic way to exist, but unfortunately we made such a dynamic approach to life into a fatalistic way of looking at it. Ayo karma, it's happening to me from somewhere. No, karma means action, your action. You're taking variety of action as you sit here. Physical, mental, emotional, energy-wise action is happening 24 hours of the day. Whether you are aware or not aware, whether you are awake or asleep, you are performing 4 dimensions of karma from today morning, since you woke up to this moment. Your physical karma, your mental karma, your emotional karma, your energy karma, how much of it is conscious? How much do you think is conscious? Well below 1%, believe me. So 99% plus is unconscious action. When you're performing 99% unconscious action, it looks like somebody is doing something to you, obviously. So this is what the word consciousness means, that more of you came under your consciousness. Instead of being less than 1%, let's say your consciousness became 2% or 5%. Suddenly you feel empowered and people around you think you're a superhuman being simply because you become more conscious of what is coming out of you and what is coming towards you, both. So this is your making. When we say your karma, we're telling you your life is your making. You must understand, as I said earlier, I think it's being ignored. This is a nation, this is a culture which is a godless culture.
Godless culture.
Godless.
Godless culture.
There is no God in this land. But we have millions of devas and devis. It's very appropriate you're all in Mumbai.
And anybody can choose whoever to pray to.
No, it's not about prayer. There never was prayer in this land. There was ritual and there is process as to how to access. When I say ritual and process as to how to access, see, in the northern part of India, this is generally lost, this terminology, because I think northern India has taken a huge beating in terms of invasions and other things. They've lost the sense of original culture. If you go to the south, even today, the deities are referred to as yantras.
Yantras.
Yantra.
Instruments.
Yantra literally means a machine, okay?
Machine.
Machine. Why did we invent machines? For example, we came up with a bicycle. Why? Because we can walk, we came up with a bicycle. If we were made like trees, we wouldn't have invented a bicycle, isn't it? Because we have mobility, better mobility and better mobility and better mobility. Because we can speak, we have a microphone, we have a telephone. Because we can see, we have a microscope, a telescope. Every instrument or every machine that you have created is only an extension of your present level of faculty, isn't it? Your ability to see, now we want to see better. Your ability to move, you want to move better. Your ability to hear, you want to hear better. Everything that you have done is only an extension of your faculties. You have not come up with any machine that you yourself are not capable of on some level. So similarly, we came up with subjective machines which we called as yantras, which are energy forms which don't have a physical form necessarily. There is a certain way to access it. I'm a living example of that in terms of how certain things are accessed. But you know, in India, whatever happens, it's not really valuable. It has to come from the West, otherwise it's not really good enough, all right? Because our education is from Greenwich Mean Time, our brains are in Greenwich Mean Time. So let me tell you something that came from Greenwich Mean Time. You all have heard of definitely Ramanujan from Tamil Nadu, who went to Oxford. And he poured out mathematics simply. The kind of mathematics he poured out, still they're analyzing the significance of it. One significant thing happened was, what he wrote in 1908, over 100 years ago, today they're deciphering that this is the backbone, mathematical backbone for the black holes. But we must understand…
For the?
Black holes in the galaxy.
Black holes, yes.
Black holes. We must understand, in early 20th century, there was no concept of black hole. There was no idea like that. But he made mathematics for black holes. Even on his deathbed, he sat and just poured out mathematics. When people asked, where is this coming from? He said, my Devi bleeds mathematics. Without his Devi, he never went anywhere. Always his Devi on the table, without that, nothing. So he said, my Devi bleeds mathematics. Why I'm telling you this is, these are certain subjective machines we created to give us ability to do something that we ourselves cannot do. That is the reason why you have an eye which is good enough, but why a camera? Because this is there, but I can't show it to you. That is there which can show it to you, isn't it? Now why we have using a microphone? I can speak and shout, but it's not the same thing. So, our ability, the only aspiration of human being is always to constantly expand our capabilities. In this effort, we created deities, which we called as devas and devis, masculine and feminine manifestation of that. Today it's very appropriate, many people are saying, Tendulkar is cricketing god. It's very much in line with our culture, because if anybody excels beyond a certain level which we think is normal, we say, oh, he's a deva. They said Arjuna was archery deva, you know. Today we have Arjuna Awards in his name. So, because he excelled, everybody could shoot, but he shot like impossible. So, we say he's a Deva. So, what excelled beyond our present capabilities, that we called a Deva, which became a deity or a machine, which would give us that access. There is a certain process how to access. This is not a place for you to go and appeal. This is not a place for you to go and put petitions, "Dear God, save me, protect me." This did not exist in this country. This is a new happening in the last few 100 years, where all the prayers of the past, if you look at it, the only prayer in this country always used to be in many forms. Essentially, "Dear God, destroy me the way I am so that I can become like you." The aspiration is not to go to God, the aspiration is always to become God.
So, Sadhguru, before we go to the lady there, is that the reason why in your ashram, in Coimbatore, you have no icons or statues?
Why, haven't I dead? I'm still living, so no statues.
No
Even
statues.
if I'm dead, I'll make sure they don't have statues of me.
So that's the message, that you can figure out what yantra you want to be your God. You can figure…
Yes, for this we created variety. If you're seeking prosperity, one kind of yantra. If you're seeking well-beings, one kind of yantra. Even bandits in the country had their own yantra, which would help them to thieve better. It's just an instrument.
Ma'am.
Good evening, sir. I'm Ashu Keval Ramani. There's been a lot of reference of God, so I'm still a little confused. I want to know, do you believe in God?
I thought I elaborated sufficiently on belief and…
I know, but do you really believe that there's a God? That does God exist?
Is Uparwala there?
Hanji. Like,
An old man sitting on a tree,
Bhagwanji, like, is he there? Like,
punishing us for the bad things we do and rewarding us for the good things we do.
Good evening, sir. I just want to ask another question related to this.
Ma'am,
My name is
your
Sonia.
name?
Sonia. I just want to know that did religion come from prayer, or did prayer come from religion?
Oh, see, about somebody being up above and managing your life. It's like this. You know, we crawled out of our mother's wombs. We looked, you must see how an infant looks at everything, because so much creation. Who did this? What is all this? You looked at your mother, maybe she did it. Well, she delivered you, she definitely did not deliver the planet. You looked at your father, maybe he did it. Well, he doesn't look like he's capable of all this.
I think your mother only licked your father's tears, actually.
No. Don't go there. Don't take the peacocks into the home. And you looked at every other adult, nobody looked like competent enough to make all these things happen. So the simplistic, childish conclusion is, there is a big man sitting up there who does all this. So everybody arrives at their belief in their own ways. This happened in New York City. An 8-year-old boy came home from school in the afternoon. He had a very progressive mother. Obviously, she was single. And he came home and asked, "Mama, is God man or a woman?" She thought about all the gender politics going on in the nation and how they tried to just settle it in the election, but it didn't work. And after much thought, she said, "Both." So the boy went into deep thought. After some time, he came back and asked, "Mama, is God black or white?" Again, she thought through all the racial politics going on in the nation, and then she came up and said, "Both." The boy went into profound thought. Then he came back and asked, "Mama, is God straight or gay?" She thought about all the politics involved with that aspect of life, and then she said, "Both." The boy jumped in joy, I got it, it's Michael Jackson." I don't know how you arrived at yours. But this is a kind of a human thing. When you know what you're doing and you're sure of what you're doing, you don't look up. You look at what you have to handle. When you don't know what to do, you look up. Yes? Up, let's discuss up before we go to who is up. You're on a round planet and the damn thing is spinning all the time. If you look up, invariably you're looking up in the wrong direction. You're not even on North Pole. You're in Mumbai. And what do you do with people in Australia? Where will they look up? In the wrong direction or you're looking in the right direction? Do you know which side is up in this cosmos? Is it somewhere marked this side up? Do you know? No. You don't even know what is up or down. How do you know who is up or down? We have made too many conclusions, childish conclusions. It's time to grow up. We must understand this. This is for sure. We didn't create this. We did not create this existence, and it's too fantastic, we're still not able to understand a leaf or a single atom in its entirety. With all our intelligence, we still cannot understand a single atom in its entirety. We know how to use it, but we don't know what it is yet. So, if you admit to yourself, you do not even know the nature of your existence, forget about the nature of the source of creation, isn't it? Yes or no? You have not figured the nature of who you are. What is the nature of your existence? But you know everything about God, you know His birthday, you know His wife's name, you know His children's name. You must understand this, in this country, all the people that you worship at one time walked this geography. But because they lived in such extraordinary ways, we saw them as exalted beings. We said, they're devas, all right? We bowed down to them in respect and in awe, because they look like extraordinary and exalted human beings, and we aspire to become like them. So there has never been a concept of one God up there, here. It is an imported idea and we are going for it, as I said, because certain societies have become an economic success. Whatever they do, we want to do. We even want to drink carbon dioxide, when even a kindergarten child knows oxygen is what you need.
Jamie, just because you are there, I'll not let you hide. KRS Jamwal.
My pleasure, Shekhar. Sadhguru, always a pleasure.
How are you?
Back more towards the karma angle, and I loved your explanation of where the Deva came from. Not that I have a belief for the US, but you said something interesting about the US, and I thought some of the people who are admirable there are people who pursue what field they have managed to excel in all their lives. And when they create surpluses going beyond what you said about sustenance and lifestyle, they give back or change the world to make it a better place. Isn't that an adequate story of a person's life?
Oh.
Come first.
If you're saying this in the context of how people give back billions and billions of dollars towards the end of their life to charity or to something, that would happen everywhere in the world if inheritance tax was 80%, which is what it is in United States. Inheritance tax, wealth tax after you die is 80%. So everybody forms a foundation. If they have enough money, they make a foundation and naturally they have to do. But if you look closely, Most of the foundations, family foundations, are managed by their children or their relatives, who are the beneficiaries, and of course they're doing some work. I'm not saying they're not doing any work, I'm not discounting the value of the work, but this is the only way you can operate in the country. This is not coming out of simply inherent whatever, your philanthropy. The laws are like that. You make as much money as you want, you enjoy your life, when you have to go, you have to give back 80% to the government. So people are finding ways, using the law, so that at least let good happen in my name rather going into the government's kitty. So we are not yet there in this country, we cannot go there immediately for variety of reasons, cultural reasons and economic reasons. We can't suddenly make a law like that, when you die, 80% will go to the government, it'll not work, all right? It's not going to work because our entire emotional involvement and stuff is such, many people are living and working and looting only to give it to their children. We still have Dhritarashtra syndrome going in the country.
In fact, Sadhguru, I'll just mention a small incident to you. There was a time when Devi Lal was Deputy Prime Minister of India, and very controversial. So at a press conference, he said, "Aur mere khilaf kya aarop hai? What other charge do you have against me?" Somebody said, "You want to make your son Chief Minister." So he said, "Will I make your son Chief Minister?"
Straightforward.
Straightforward, yes. Maruk.
Sadhguru, namaskar. My name is Mahrukh Inayat. I work with Shekhar for the print. I have two quick questions. The first one is, do you believe that rapists and terrorists should be hanged? Capital punishment for rapists and terrorists. And secondly, our government has criminalized homosexuality in this country. Do you think that section, that law should be changed? Thank you.
See, the laws in any particular nation are made at certain times of its growth and its evolution. Right now, when the nation is continuously being threatened by terrorist action, and the sovereignty of the nation itself is under threat, not in one particular area, in many places, we need some stringent laws. Fundamentally, am I for legal killing? I'm not for killing of any kind. Whether you kill an ant or a human being, I don't like it, okay? But without killing, you're not able to exist, so I'm saying at least please minimize it, don't do it beyond what is needed.
And not extrajudicially.
That is not even in question.
Not even a question,
yes. Even killing of an ant or an insect or a worm, let it be to the minimum, to the extent it is a must for you, not beyond that, because this planet is not just made for you and me. This is the most retrograde idea that has entered human mind is, every other creature is here to serve us. No, they have a life of their own. They have a complete life of their own. I have spent so much time in the jungles of southern India. If you observe birds and animals and other things, you must see the level of organization and involvement they have in their life. A complete life of their own, okay? So they are not here to serve us, they are here to live their life. An ant does not think he's an insignificant life. An ant thinks he's the most significant life on this planet. So having said that, but the nation is in a certain level of evolution. Just trying to transplant laws from nations which are in a completely different state and bring it down here and say, ban this, ban that, take off this, may not work for our country. You must understand this. It's very easy to say, ban the capital punishment. But you ask the families of victims who've not just seen crime, they've seen brutality of the worst kind, unimaginable levels of brutality, which all of you have been reporting and talking about. You think of their families when that man walks tomorrow on the street, how they feel. You must have some way, especially for a terrorist. Capital punishment is not a deterrent because he's coming to die, all right? He wants to die. He doesn't want to live, he wants to die. So a man who wants to die, you have to help him.
What about rapists? Rapist, she asked.
See, in the country already they made this distinction. In the rarest of rare, I think we should keep it for now. Is this a permanent law? No, I don't believe it should be a permanent law. As a society, as we evolve, as the situations become less and become negligible, then we can say, okay, we can feed him and keep him in the prison.
Right.
But right now, I think it's necessary. But at the same time, there is another face to this killing or threatening a capital punishment for the rapist is, generally the only witness to the rape is the victim. The best thing is not to leave her alone, leave her alive, you know. This will become the trend, this is the danger. So threatening them with too much capital punishment, we're going to hang you, we're going to hang you, on the news channels they're saying, we got to hang him, we have to castrate him. This must go. This must be done gently in the process of law.
Otherwise, he'll be tempted to kill the
He
victim.
will be tempted, not tempted, he wants to kill because
That's
if you
the only
leave her
witness.
alone, that's the only way he can be caught because that's the only witness there is. So, one thing is you're kind of pushing the society in a way that, you know, people will get killed. We must understand this, we are a society in transition. Please, I want you to listen to this little carefully because immediately you can make conclusions, oh, he's supporting this. I'm not supporting anything. We must understand, we are a society in transition. There was a time, at the age of 14, a girl would get married, at the age of 17, 18, a boy would get married. Let's face it, there are hormonal drives in every human being, all right? Unless they've transcended that and gotten somewhere out of something in their life, every other human being, normal human being has these things. Now they were getting married and this was kind of settled there. Now because of our education process and individual aspirations, on an average, I think girls in India are getting married at 21, 22, boys are getting married 25, 26, and a whole lot of them have leaving their natural habitat of rural existence and moving into Mumbai. I want you to just think about a guy who just moved into Mumbai from somewhere, some remote place of the country. I know you will thrash him, but suppose he finds a job. Who is going to get him married? Where is he going to get married? If he lived in that community, his parents, his mama, his chittappa, his chacha, all these people would work to see that he's married. He says, no, I don't want to get married. Every girl says, I don't want to get married. They will say, no, you must, and somehow fix it up. You must understand, this is not about that. This is about handling fundamental human needs. Societies are driven by human needs, isn't it? Now he lands up in the city, where does his sexual drive go, I'm asking? Where does it find expression? So we need to have a debate. Are we ready for premarital engagement? Or do we want to get married at 14, 15? We must have an open debate about this. We don't even want to talk about it and we only want to hang the rapist. It's not going to work. You must understand, he is also a victim of times. He doesn't know how to handle himself. I am not trying to approve his rape, but have you created an atmosphere where you will turn every young man into a sage? Have you created that? No. Have you provided him an outlet? No. You just think if you close your eyes, it gets handled. It doesn't get handled, it's finding expression in ugly ways. So we need to look at our life. Either we consciously transit with minimum amount of aberration, or it will happen in compulsive ways somehow, in clandestine ways. Even today, I'm sure, even in reasonably well-to-do homes, if any hormonal issue of a boy or a girl means they will handle it in a clandestine way, not in an open way, because we're still not willing to face the human biology straight in the face. We need to do that.
And the other question about the section 377 of IPC, which criminalizes homosexuality.
See, we inherited a whole lot of laws from the British. This is called as the buggery law, even today, in the law book. So this came from that time. And what do I think about it? I think this also needs a debate. Not protests on the street, not trying to make sexual orientation as an identity for a human being. It should not happen. This is unfortunately happening. But what one does in their bedroom is never my business. I never see it as my business.
and should not be the state's business also?
State will not know either.
Right.
State has no means to know unless you want to display it on the street. State doesn't know, isn't it?
We are out of time. I am being screamed at, but I'm taking advantage of the fact that Google tells me, it's been telling me all the time, and any time I know I want to take chances with Sadhguru, I check, I am 7 full days older than him. So I can, for once, pull rank over him and stretch his time. So Anjali, and I think we'll take, see what he does is, he answers many questions in one answer. So let me take 2 or 3 questions and then close it. So you ask a question and then the gentleman next to you has been raising his hand for a long time. And then...
My name is Diksha and I'm doing 24/7 kind of a job. I'm a homemaker. My question is, as you have shared, spirituality is a journey of learning yourself, others, and in this journey you keep learning so many things.
I did not say that.
I mean, in one of the conversations you said that it's a very natural process. You keep understanding about yourself. My point is that when you are in this journey, most of the time, I have observed that people shun their family or worldly responsibilities and move in this spiritual world for a larger objective. So considering that, the responsibilities which have been shunned, aren't they have some responsibility for their own family members?
You're talking about Gautam Buddha or somebody local?
I think it happens in this modern era also, where people, once they move to the spiritual world, they become individual and they think on a very larger perspective. They don't think about their families and other stuff. And they create their own world too. So first is it fair? And second, there are people who are in that catch-22 situation, whether to be, in the world of materialistic, worldly, where you have to follow the responsibilities and still follow certain advices and still, lead their way, or completely move out. So there are 2 worlds, spiritual world and materialistic world. Still people following certain things, they feel good about the teachings and stuff.
I think you should be here.
I have a question, that's why I'm not there.
Do I look irresponsible? No, I get you the rhetoric.
Thank you.
I get the rhetoric. The thing is, say we have assumed… I'm sorry.
Sadhguru, can I have another question added? Yes, please go ahead. After this. Bachi, after this. No, please ask a question so you can answer both.
Namaskaram Sadhguru, lots of respect and regards to you. My name is Kajal and I'm an actor. And my question to you is, could you please explain the meaning of intuition? And does intuition have anything to do with spirituality? Is there any connection?
Well, it will get too complicated. See, we must understand this. Spiritual process means it is not a journey. I have never said that. You read in other books. Spiritual process means it's about turning inward. If you're turning inward, what is the distance between what is you and what is you? You and you, there is no distance. When there is no distance, how do you make a journey? It's a thing going on for a long time. That is because people have convoluted ideas of what is spiritual process. Always they told you spiritual process means is about self-knowing. Knowing yourself, maybe you're taking a long time, but still you're not covering distance, isn't it? Because there's no distance to cover. So definitely it cannot be a journey. To make a journey, you need distance. You may be taking time, but there is no distance to cover. Let's be clear about that. About becoming irresponsible, about if somebody is going through a divorce. See, if you want to divorce somebody, spirituality or spiritual excuse is a very respectable excuse. You are divorcing your wife or husband because of an affair is a bad thing in the society. But you are divorcing because for a higher purpose is a very…
So go to an ashram for a couple of months and you are done.
So somebody may be using that as a ruse, but essentially spiritual process means it's something that you do within yourself, not something that you do around yourself. What you do within yourself in no way demands that you have to be in this place or that place. For a certain moment of consideration, maybe you want to withdraw for a small period of time. That you do for many things. You want to take an examination, don't you withdraw from your social sphere because you want to study? Similarly, you withdrew for a week or a month. This doesn't mean you've given up life. So this entire idea of spiritual process means I must go to the Himalayan cave. I'm giving you first-hand information, Her Nandani. You must know this because there's a…
But he'll build a tower there also.
There is a business possibility, that's why I'm saying. To withdraw to the mountain caves, all the caves are taken. There's really no accommodation left there. So in Mumbai, if you build cave apartments, you may
Good
do
idea.
well, so you can move into the cave if you wish, but essentially you must understand this. Spiritual process means turning inward. Turning inward means, maybe I want to close my eyes and sit for a while. But now if you are such a stupid set of family that if I close my eyes, you think I'm going away somewhere, definitely I feel like going away. Otherwise, there's no need to go away anywhere. Spiritual process is about becoming all-inclusive. This is not about exclusivity, this is about becoming all-inclusive. So where is the question of going away? It's a larger engagement. So, there is no such need. But if individual people have needs that they feel they've made a mistake, they correct themselves, that's not because of spirituality, because of their own individual choices. About intuition. See, intuition essentially means a different level of computing, not a different level of perception. Spiritual process or mysticism means moving into a different level of perception. For this, you have to enhance your perception. Intuition is just a different level of computing. This is, if I ask you to multiply 1736 with 18,334, what's the number? You don't know. But if you buy a 100-rupee calculator, tuk tuk tuk, it'll come out. So is it smarter than you? No. It is just that you have to go through 25 steps to get to that number, it is just jumping to it, this is intuition. We all have so much information that you're not conscious of. Most of the information that you have within you, you are not conscious of this. There is an entire silo of memory which we call as manas. See, right now you're sitting here, you definitely don't remember how your great-great-great-grandmother looked like. But her nose is sitting on your face right now. Your body remembers. I'm saying there's a whole lot of memory about life here. So if you develop intuition without logical steps, instead of going through 10 steps, you just hopped one and got there. This is a certain way of exploiting what you have, which you must have. But today, because of modern education, we've made logical mind everything. So for everything, we have to go through many steps. This is one reason why modern societies are going through such enormous levels of stress, because the smallest things, they have 10 steps. What your grandmothers knew just like that, today the billion-dollar research is going on about the same things. Because we are looking at everything logically. Intuition brings ease to your life, that you don't have to go through many steps for every simple thing, you just know. It's like, today what to eat in urban societies, especially in United States, is a huge issue. What to eat, every 2 years they keep coming up with the new way to eat. But you throw something in front of your dog, he knows whether to eat or not to eat, isn't it? You have a far more evolved neurological system. Why is it that you don't know? If something comes in front of me, people bring whatever they think is the best food, I just look at it and I say, no. People say, Sadhguru, this is specially made for you. It is fine, but no. Because I know how this food will behave within me, simply by looking at it. Your human neurological system is the most evolved neurological system. You must be far more sensitive and perceptive to everything in the world and in the universe than any other creature. Unfortunately, it is not so, because like you got a cell phone. Because of your cell phone, you're walking straight into the traffic. You don't know where the cars are coming or buses are coming. Similarly, you have a new gadget which you call a cerebral activity, which is very new in the evolutionary scale. You still are hyped about it. The silly thoughts flying all over the place. You think you're so busy with it that you don't notice what's happening. When the tsunami happened, we were the first teams to reach there with our medical vans. When I looked there, lots of dead bodies, human bodies. But I noticed not a single fish is dead. Not only those cattle which were tied in the homes are dead. All the dogs, cattle, donkeys, everybody had the brains to move away. Only the human fool did not realize. Simply because this is going on and you don't notice a thing.
So I think the last two questions, Bachi and the gentleman there.
I'm Bachi Karkaria. I'm just taking out from Tavleen's question. I'm really going to pin you on to that. And that is that, as Indians, we are great believers in religion, faith, call it what you will. We also have spiritual leaders like you. But today, all of our religion is being politicized. So do you think that you're abrogating your responsibility in not speaking about it? You're even giving away your constituency.
Did I not speak about it? What is this?
No, you didn't. You didn't really say that.
Tell me, what should I speak?
Yeah, no, but really that should our spiritual leaders jump into the fray and tell politicians, this is not the religion that is ours, and you stay out of it, because this is really not what religion or faith is about.
What makes you think it's not being said?
It's not being said.
You want me to say it on a microphone? No, when you want somebody to receive something, you have to tell them in a certain way, the way they get it, and it is being said. What makes you think it's not said? Wherever there's an opportunity, I'm definitely saying it, 100%. And anyway, we must understand this. You said we are great believers in religion and faith. No, we are not. This is what I'm trying to tell you. You must understand, if you travel 50, 100 kilometers in this country, people look different, dress different, speak different, eat different. But for over 10,000 years, we called ourselves a nation, though there were over 200 political entities at certain times. Even people from outside this land also recognized as one nation, though the many kings ruling this. What is it, do you think, it made us a nation? We look different, everything is different. Normally, nations are always made on the basis of sameness. We are one nation who defeats the definition of a nation. The reason why we always experienced ourselves as one nation and people saw us as a strange land of people is because we were not believers. We did not have a God, we were seekers. This was strange for the rest of the world. So they said, this is strange, lot of people. So, the reason why we stayed together, because of the spiritual thread of seeking, that our aspiration is freedom and liberation, not God. So we have never been great believers and of faith. We have always been a debate. Just look at the so-called scriptures of India, full of debates, isn't it? There is no, what do you say?
There is no final word.
There is no commandment. No God in this country or those who believed are godly or divine could ever give a commandment. Look at Krishna's plight, that man is asking 1,000 questions.
Except, if I may say so, some Asaram Bapu.
I don't know, I have not met the man, so I don't like to…
Or messenger of God.
No, from my own experience of life, I'm sorry I'm saying this. From my own experience of life, in these 35 years that I have stood up to do what I am doing, I don't go by the media reports because I know what's been said about me. And I have not met the man, so I don't want to make a judgment, but the law, there is a law. If somebody is committing a crime, let it take its process. So their people came and approached me, you must say something. Other people came and approached, you must put this down. I said, why will I say anything against him or for him? Because I don't know the guy. If I know you, I'll say, okay, Shekhar is like this, why are you doing this to him? I don't know the man, I don't know what the hell is doing.
Don't tell anybody the truth.
No, I'm going to tell them, he's talking off the cuff, but he doesn't even have a cuff. I'm the one who has large cuffs.
So the last question right there,
Yeah, hello. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. This question is, my name is Avi. I'm a creative director. So when we get layered with influence...
Why are you copying a question? I've seen people are copying answers, but…
I've been writing notes as well, so this is just how I do it. When we get layered with influence and conditioning, how do you find your voice, as no thought is original or mine? How do you find the nature of your existence or deepen your intuition in that sense?
Now, it's good that somebody is asking how, because only when you ask how, I become relevant. If you ask me all these questions, only it is about, you are asking for a conclusion. I am not willing to give you a conclusion. I will never entertain you with another conclusion to replace your existing conclusion. My whole life is only about deepening your question, because to ask a profound question, it takes a lot of work to sharpen that question so that it sinks right into your heart. If you manage to sharpen your question deep enough, you will get enlightened, believe me. The problem is, nobody has invested in a question. This is the problem. Before the question comes up, they have a ready-made conclusion about everything. They have not invested enough into your question. My entire early life went with questions and questions and questions. A cloud of billion questions around my head all the time. And wherever you went, everybody has a ready-made answer. Nobody is really answering you the way it needs to be. So, I only deepened my questions, I did not find answers. But if your question becomes deep enough, you will see the source of the question, if you know where it's coming from. The fundamental root of not knowing something is the question. So if the question becomes sharp enough, it'll sink to that point as to what is it that you did not know, you get there and you know. So about how, if you ask how, I have methods and methods and methods, okay? To start with, if your question is genuine only, I would ask you to invest 30 hours of focused time, okay? In a scientific way. You don't have to believe a thing that I say, okay? Because I won't say anything, first of all. I'll give you something to work with, you work with it, if it works, I'll give you something else to work with, but it needs 30 hours of time to just help you to turn inward. When I say inward, I'm not talking contemplation or dissection, because what you call as my body and what you call as my mind are things that you accumulated from outside. This is accumulation of food that you've eaten, this is accumulation of impressions that you've taken in. So we don't consider body and mind and even your most profound thought as internal, it's all external. It is the data that you have collected which is playing out. We are not interested in your psychological drama. If you really want to turn inward, what instruments do you have? You don't have instruments to turn inward. Because all the instruments of perception that you have are outward bound. Your sight, your hearing, your smell, your taste, your touch is everything outward bound. How will you turn inward with this? You cannot turn this. Because these are instruments of survival, they came to you naturally unasked. But if you are seeking, you need something more. For this, a little striving is needed. I am asking only for 30 hours of focused striving. We will format it to you whichever way you want. 7 days, 3 days, 2 days, however you want it, we will format it for you. But you must be willing to give 30 hours of focused time. Now, presently, I still don't have a technology to make it 3 hours, unless you are such a profound seeker already. To make you turn inward, it takes 30 hours for me. The day I'm able to do it in 3 hours, I will announce it to you. But right now it takes 30 hours. If you invest 30 hours, I'll give you a simple way that you turn inward, where your experience of life is little more than your physical body and your psychological structure. Now you have something concrete. Otherwise, you're only in a balloon of thoughts.
I think you can check that out outside. We really have to
There is
stop now.
this process that we are offering as a 30-hour, it's called inner engineering. Why I'm calling inner engineering is, see today, you want to create anything outside, you want it well engineered, isn't it? Yes or no? You trust engineering and technology with everything outside. When it comes to inside, you have fancy philosophies and beliefs which have not worked for 1,000 years, but still you want to go on. Why? Simply because you believe and somebody says it's sacred. No, there is nothing sacred or filthy in this world. There is only some things that work and some things that don't work. I am only interested in that which works. This is spiritual process for me. What truly works on all levels of life, this is spiritual process. What works on one level and doesn't work on another level, obviously is not a complete thing, isn't it?
Sadhguru, I have reserved all my questions. In fact, this audience was so brilliant, I had to do no work. You can see that, I wasn't caught out. But there's one question which has bothered me, and I'll just misuse my position here to steal time. You said, when I heard you for the first time in Jaipur, you said death actually will come as a big relief to most people. And I asked you a question as to what you meant, and you explained it. But if death is really such a big relief to people, then are we to justify suicidal thoughts? Let me be done with it. What ho gaya? Enough.
I don't know what I said on that day. Maybe I said your death will come as a relief to everybody.
That Sadhguru will be abatement of suicide. you did no such thing.
No, no. Yes, see the thing is, life is beautiful and very sweet. If you know how to keep yourself well, this is a beautiful life and very sweet and very fantastic. Not everybody is experiencing it that way, unfortunately, but it is possible for every human being to do this much, that your experience of life on this planet, you can make it very pleasant. But I want you to just imagine yourself, you're sitting right here doing the same job, this Sadhguru will die, another will come, all kinds of people, terrorist will come, you'll interview him, politician will come, you'll interview him, all kinds of people, you'll interview him and go on. Let's say next 10,000 years, you're still on print. You will want a relief, isn't it? And when it becomes long enough, and if you see the process of life, not just on the surface, if you see the nature and process of life. Let me ask you this otherwise. Did you enjoy your school?
Yes.
But were you eager to go to college?
Sometimes I was, sometimes I wasn't, and sometimes I went to college but bunked.
That's fine.
That was most of the time.
Just because, for whatever reason, because you could bunk, because you could do so many things, whatever. When you were in school, even if this process of school was very pleasant and wonderful for you, suppose it was, would you still not want to leave the school and go to the next stage? The same thing with this.
Right.
Doesn't matter how wonderful it is. The very nature of the human being is such, you always want to go to the next stage, whatever that is, isn't it?
And come back. If you could.
Whether we want you to come back or not, leave it to us.
I think on that note, much as everybody would want all the 30 hours here, get themselves properly…
I am not coming back.
Properly re-engineered. I don't think we'll hold you for 30 hours, Sadhguru. Thank you very much. You've been so wonderful and so generous with your time. And thank you very much. This has been such a great conversation that I think we can carry on doing it every week. So thank you very much for watching Off the Cuff or OTC, and come back for our next edition. Thank you.